Good morning, St. Luke's. This morning, we have the distinct honor of the Reverend Dr.Gerald Durley, who is a legendary warrior, prophet, minister, who has not only transcended his Christian faith and his Providence Missionary Baptist Church pulpit by embracing and encouraging an entire generation of Atlanta's unique brand of civil and human rights-based leadership, but has also led an expanding dialogue that highlights the interrelationships of causes and consequences of climate change and environmental justice. Reverend Dr. Durley now combines the disciplines of faith and science with the lessons learned as a civil and human rights advocate from the 1960s. He asserts that for environment and our communities to be healed, the educational, scientific, business, political, arts, and faith communities must seek common solutions founded on moral decision-making. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Durley.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
You're welcome.
You know, I finally made it to heaven. For so many years, I've gone through the past and been in here with Bruce Gunter, and I go back, I don't know how many years, and Dan and all of us over the years when we come here. When I was president of Concerned Black Clergy, so many things, and St. Luke's has always been a place that we've held in high esteem because of the progressive work that you've always done, the way that you've looked at situations, and I've had to label you differently now. You no longer, you used to be visionaries here, but you're not visionaries any longer. And the new label I give to St. Luke's is not a visionary church. You're a solutionary church. You're a group of solutionaries because I just heard about the boys' school, I believe, a few moments ago, where you're looking at things and you've always been on the cutting edge. Does that make a difference? We tell people to use their preaching voice. I want to, first of all, good morning. I want to thank you. Wherever if my voice gets a little hoarse, I just got in around a little after 1 o'clock this morning. Yesterday, I was addressing about 100,000 people in Dallas, Texas, at the Earth X conference. I had the opportunity to be down there with Trammell Crow puts it on, and he asked me to come down. Because for the first time after 9 years, with all of the scientists and all of the business people and all of the politicians, for the first time after 9 years, they finally understood that climate change, global warming, and environmental justice has to rest upon a moral foundation. We're in a moral dilemma right now in the nation. We're in a moral situation where we've got to make decisions, not around a political decision or a business decision or a scientific decision. I'm very comfortable now understanding what business people want. And I'm not ashamed to call out names of the energy companies and the fossil burning fuel companies because we've been too reticent to call them out. But I think it's so important now that we understand that the business of fossil burning fuel and getting away from alternative energy sources and is so business people want a return on their money. Finish. I've talked to business executives who understand the whole climate change issue. They're concerned about diseases that we cannot even diagnose, but they say we have an investment and we will go and try to do other things. But in the meantime, until we can figure it out. Now we realize that we already have enough tools out of Stanford, 95% to mitigate the climate change, but we can't make it prosperous. We can't go to solar yet because we don't know how to get off the grid to make it make sense for money or when. So consequently, I understand what business people are in it for. I understand what science people are in it for. They come up with some of the greatest solutions as to why we need to reduce carbon and hold it down to 1.5 Celsius. We understand that. Scientists are proficient in their duty. they came up with the Paris Agreement, where they wrote up the IPC, or Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So we understand scientists want that. Business people need the profit. Science people want the knowledge. But these politicians, they want the power, and they will go whichever way the wind blows. If it goes this way, if it goes that way, to stay in power. So if the politicians want power, the business people want money, and the scientific people want information to be shared, all of those things are fine, and everybody can win if it's on a moral foundation. God has to be in it. God, what do you mean God? What do you mean faith? Don't you realize, oh no, we don't, no. Because when you there is something very important. When you look into all of the faiths, whether it's the Muslim, the Christian, or Buddhist, whatever, but in the Christian tradition, we feel comfortable, and I preached 30 years at Providence across the 25 years before I rewired. I didn't retire, rewired. I'm in rewirement now. And I left, and we are comfortable preaching from the book of Exodus. We will go to the 10 Commandments so easily. We'll say, thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not fornicate, thou shalt not bear false. And we're very comfortable exegeting those passages and speaking to our congregation. And we're comfortable with the 10 Commandments. But how can you get, if anyone has ever played baseball and you hit the ball, you do not run to second base. If you run to second base and pass first base, they call you out. But what we do in the Bible, when it comes to commandments from God, we run to the second book of the Bible. Rather than Genesis 1:26, the first commandment says, take care of my earth. You're the stewards of my earth. You have an obligation, a moral responsibility. This is a commandment. And if you take care of my earth, what I will do for you, I will give you what you need. I'll keep your water clean. I will keep unpolluted air. I will have the kind of food that you'll need. I will give you what we need. But we have become so inundated with and I'm not against technology, believe me, I still use a telephone and a microwave. But we have got to understand that now we have got to stop putting profits over people. Our consumptive lifestyles, and it keeps growing, and now we've got diseases that we can't even understand. How did I get into this? Not me, not Mrs. Durley's boy, not a kid that says, wait a minute, my goal in life is to play professional basketball. So I went down to Tennessee State in 1959 and joined up with Martin Luther King. I'm in this now 60 years, and it was a civil and human rights movement. That was what I was concerned about. And as it evolved, I began to understand that we've got to be concerned. It's a constitutional right for everybody to be able to sit in front of that white line on the bus and drink from water fountains that are not marked colored, to buy in neighborhoods if you could afford it where you were. That was what we fought for all through the civil rights movement. And I was concerned, even as the civil rights, when I began growing up and go through my life, continuing to fight for human rights and civil rights and female rights and gender rights. That was my concern. But you know, God has a great sense of humor. And a lady came up to me here in this city, a white lady. She said, Dr. Durley, I was just wondering, I'm concerned, and you can help me, with teenage pregnancy among black girls. And I said, oh, no, not another do-gooder. I got too many things on my plate. She said, but we've got to curb that. We've got to make a difference in this teenage pregnancy, and I want to do it. That's my calling. I said, oh, no, not another calling. She said, I would like to take you with me. You never know when you're trying to open up and be transparent how God has something in your life to make a difference. You never know when a kairos moment will come upon you and you think you're here for this and something else changes you into this way. So she said, will you go with me out to the airport? I'm meeting with a group of evangelical preachers. And Joel Osteen was a part of that group. And so I went out there with this lady, and she was telling them about pregnancy, and they thought she was talking about abortion and all of this, so they just beat her up. And I was standing by the wall. I said, this is a vicious group, about 50 of them. And one of them made a mistake. He looked at me and said, is this the black bodyguard you brought with you? I thought he was speaking to somebody else, but since I was the only black person in the room, I assumed it was me. And she said, no, he's a friend of mine. Is this who your bodyguard? I said, no, he's a friend of mine. He's a friend of mine. So what happened, one guy said, well, if he's going to speak, do you have a presentation, sir? I said, well, yes, I do, if you want me to speak. We want you to speak, but you've got to give us your PowerPoint. Where's your power? Just so efficient. Sometimes you can be so efficient, you can analyze yourself out of what's really happening. So I stood there, and so one of them said, let him speak, give us your PowerPoint. So I got up and I simply said this. He asked for my PowerPoint. I'm pointing to my power right now. My power will not lose energy. My power battery will never go down. And I finished. The lady's name was Jane Fonda. She introduced me to her husband at that time, Ted Turner. The rest is 9 years ago, and I began to meet people. Sally Bingham, Interfaith Power and Light. Then I began to meet other people in the Sierra Club and other things, and I'm saying, wait a minute. My charge, my calling, my destiny is how do we change the legislative process and the laws so that there's equality and justice in our nation for all people. Then I began to think about it. And I began to understand when I began to see the temperatures rising, when I began to see the acidity of the ocean coming up, when I began to see the melting glaciers. Before I had never seen a polar bear. And if they could make it from one glacier to another, what did that mean to me living in Atlanta? I had to deal with the germane issues that impact us each every day. But then I began to understand about what fossil burning fuel was doing and how it was putting carbon dioxide in the air, and what carbon dioxide was doing in terms of raising the asthma rate among children in the urban area from 7 to 28%. I began to see the cancers growing in people's body. I began to see how the hypothalamus gland, I began to see the mercury in the body, and I began to see what it was doing to not the next generation, but to the generation right now, you and me. I said, that's not my issue. My issue is basically how do I continue to look at the social program. Then I began to connect it. When I went to Ferguson, Illinois, they talk about a police shooting, but if you take any group of people, black or white, Jewish, Buddhist, whatever, put them in a small contained area, limit their access to health care, poor education, unemployment, and then put a 105-degree temperature for 20 days on them, you know what you've got? You've got a devastating situation. And then I began to connect the dots. And so many times in our society, we don't connect the dots. Even in the environmental community, we're fighting now. Don't just be one person, I'm for clean air, I'm for clean water, I'm for this, I'm for that. No, we've got to connect the dots because it all comes together. And if we're following the first commandment of God, take care of my green earth, and I will provide. So then that's when I started thinking more and more about it. Meeting with Sally Bingham in Atlanta and the Interfaith Power and Light Company out of San Francisco. And I'm sitting there and I began to really realize something that's very interesting, that every meeting that I went to, they were talking about how climate change negatively, disproportionately impacts people of color, poor communities, rural areas. And I'd go in the meeting, I was sitting there and they were talking about how this was so devastating, but I was the only person of color in the room. And then they would come up with this word that we throw around, diversity, and I was the diverse. And I said, something is amiss here. How can we reach toward we attain or achieve a goal of bringing the thinking of all people together who have been impacted? And that's what I got involved. So now I chair. I just went in just a foot soldier, like in the movement with Dr. King. I went in with a foot soldier. And now I chair the board all throughout America. 40 states, 22,000 houses of faith all across America, bringing forth a message about what we've got to do from God's house. It is a responsibility for those of us who've been blessed, for those of us who enjoy the bounty now, to begin to say, wait a minute, we now must speak truth to power. We now must be strong enough to speak to the legislators, to speak to the deniers, as they call themselves. I don't believe the deniers. Who can deny what we've gone through last year? Who can deny something called polar vortex? Who can deny the floods and the droughts and the earthquakes? Who can deny a tsunami that wipes out thought? Who can deny that? But you can justify it. We can justify it, and the reason we justify it, the reason that it is justified is because it turns a dollar. I have no problem with a person turning a dollar, but turn the dollar for the good of the masses. You're a socialist. No, I'm a realist and I'm a Christian. And if we're to do that, and we talk about it, but what's interesting in this whole movement, if it doesn't directly impact us, then we tend to be somewhat reticent and somewhat taciturn in our approach. So therefore, we've got to now begin to speak out, because what's happening now, as the sea level begins to rise, Miami is ground zero. We hear about Miami, but right now Miami is flooding today, and it hasn't rained in several weeks because the water is coming up through the sewage in the city. All along North Carolina and South Carolina, the coasts are rising. So we talk about migration, immigration on the south border. You wait till people start moving into Atlanta in about 15 years. We'll be running all over. And they're coming because they want, where are they doing? They're leaving areas that are going underground. 2 more major storms in New York, and it will be underwater. It went under the last time. So when we look at it now, we who are called by God to understand that He gave us a beautiful planet. He gave us a planet with clear, pristine brooks and streams, oceans, where you could go out and breathe. It is not inconceivable that in another 4 to 5 years, and that's conservative, that those of us who are sitting here will not come in here without a mask on our face. You'll see it in China. When you go to China, you'll see that all of the masks that they're wearing, they cannot drive 50 feet because of the carbon dioxide from the automobile industries that are going there. So we've got to be very conscious that now we've got to do something now to mitigate this. Durley, what do? That's always a solutionaries. Solutionaries. You know, I'm tired of visionaries. I got visions all over. I go to sleep with a vision. I'm a visionary, but I had to stop and become a solutionary. First of all, as we did in the civil rights movement, there were 3 words that were very paramount in our life. If we had to move, we didn't know where to go, what to do at times, but we knew we had to organize, strategize, and mobilize. Organize, strategize, and mobilize. This, what I'm doing now, is merely a point of awareness. I had 30 young preachers about 6 months ago out of Jeremiah Wright's church. Otis Moss III is there now. And I had these young, gifted black, these young people, men and women, they could preach. They could make something. They made me believe. They were so good. And so I started talking to them, and I said, you have an obligation to speak to your congregation about consumption lifestyle. We started off changing light bulbs. I was around there changing light bulbs, and I was called the light bulb preacher, and they laughed at me. Now they laugh at me between their coughing. But the light bulb, we went to light bulb, then we went to awareness. So this is the organization of where we begin to realize that this is a moral battle we're in when we start rescinding the regulations against drilling in the ocean, deforestation we've got to look at. Right now, it's just recently come out, where oxygen comes from is plankton. Plankton grows on coral. Corals now are being bleached, plankton is going down, so sea life is dying and the oxygen that comes out. We've heard words like greenhouse gas. We've heard words like carbon dioxide and all of the words. But what good are words unless they're action? Because see, words come from thoughts. So we've got to change our thoughts, because see, you start with a thought, then you go to a word, then a word becomes your behavior, and your behavior becomes your habit, and your habit then becomes your values, and your values become the destiny. Right now, our thoughts are destroying our destiny, so we've got to go back and say, we at St. Luke's, we at Providence, we at Temple Sinai, or the temple down with Peterburg, we now must collectively come together and be bold enough to stand about the moral situation here in America in terms of climate change, because it's all interrelated. What good is it a young kid, and I directed 19 Head Start programs in Fulton and Clayton County at one time. What good is it for me to keep these children bright and cheery from 3 to 5 and they die at 7 because of an asthmatic attack? It's all interrelated, and when anybody becomes desperate and hopeless, we live in a hopeless society. I have never, and many of you probably, when I grew up, we had breaking news about every week. We'd run to the TV, breaking news, breaking news. Now we have it after every commercial. So breaking news is not breaking news anymore, it's broken news. We just, so what? 55 people were killed in New Zealand in the mosque. So a Jewish person was killed yesterday in San Diego. Okay, next. Excuse me, let me go to the back. We now must be the breaking news variable in this climate change situation. I never thought that I would be up, particularly here in heaven, speaking about climate change. Not me. Too many things. Next month I'll be 77 years old. So I've been on the field since 1959 in the civil rights movement, but always for the good and the order, not only of God's people, but it was never the environmental context. Because now I can connect the dots, and all this organizational period is to connect the dots. That's why when it comes to Earth Day, I think this was the 40th celebration of Earth Day. And if we don't get involved, it will become just another holiday. Another holiday. At one time in the early days, the first 10 or 15 years, Earth Day came up and people were picking up bottles and picking up cans and all that. And now it's just become another holiday. And I think we must re-energize. One of the challenges that I face with my own colleagues in the environmental movement and the conservation movement, one year I flew out about 7 years ago to New Mexico to the philanthropic group, Ford Foundation. It was about $400 or $500 million worth that they were going to give to different foundations. And I went out there with a lady named Laura Seidel, and I just sat on the side and listened, and I heard more and learned more about what constitutes climate change and the opening and all of this, and I learned a lot. And at the end, they were getting ready to close, and I was standing there, and I don't know how they picked me out, but they did. And they, Dr. Durley, would you like to maybe make a closing comment? I said, no, I have nothing to say. You sat here for 3 days and nothing. I said, no, it's fine. It wasn't my fight. It wasn't my challenge. But finally somebody said, well, at least make a closing comment. So I got up and I said, all of you are some of the smartest people I've ever known. I've learned more today about climate change, global warming, the business aspect, the political nuances. But I'd like to say this. You're the dullest people I've ever met. You're so dull. You can't excite anything. You couldn't excite a circus. And the room was like, who is this? Who gave him the right to speak? And I could see it coming at me. And I said, the reason I say that, we're in competition with the Atlanta housewives when we put our message. We are in competition with marketers. And if you come up and say, well, I don't know, maybe we'll make it, we're losing. You've got to be excited. The word for enthusiasm means in theos, which means in God. So you got to be excited. I was not excited. I'll be glad to get back to Atlanta and watch Gunsmoke, but I cannot stand here and hear this. And finally, way in the back, a man said, next thing was a standing ovation. I said, what did I say? If the movement is to have that, we've got to understand, we've got to look at our legislators. On next week at 2 o'clock on May 1st, I'll be meeting with David Perdue in Washington. I'll leave David Perdue's office at 2 o'clock and meet with Johnny Isaacson at 3 o'clock. Then on the 7th, you'll see it we're going to be in a press conference in front of the White House on May the 7th, if they let us in. Not the protest like we used to do, but bringing a level in the organization of awareness. The strategies are in place. Most of you probably know more about climate change than I. Some of you have been in this battlefield a long time. So the message I give now is this. We're on the winning team. Do not become discouraged. Be ye not weary in well-doing, for you will reap in due season if you faint not. When I played basketball for Tennessee State, and we come into the halftime, if we were 60 points down, can you imagine coming in and you're 60 points down, and the coach comes in and says, the other team is much better than us. Looks like your shoes are worn out. It's going to be tough. They're winning everything. They're winning all of the votes. They're winning on the legislation. They've got the Senate. And he talks like that, say, now we're going to go out, I guess, and give the best we can the second half. What kind of coach is that? So I'm saying when you come into the halftime, isn't it great we're 60 points down? We've got to make up that and then show people how we're going to win before the buzzer sounds. And then the thoughts begin to change. That is what, Ann, we've got to put into our ethos, into our thinking. Climate change, we could go on and on about all of the scientific methods about it. But it is no doubt about it, when we pulled out of the Paris Treaty and other treaties, it was a political gesture. People understand this. I just read where the class, they just come out with a book out of Harvard, and one of the three classmates have written about one of their classmates The classmate that finished with them, his name was Jared Kushner. And they said that Jared Kushner was a strong advocate for the environment and clean energy. Why has he sold them out? I just read it this morning, it was on the internet. We're shifting because of certain political values and economic gains. I say, and it's a lot. I didn't bring these. This is nothing to sell. These are all books to show that there. I mean, this is Climate Church and Climate World by Jim Antel. How people of faith must work for change. This one here, God serving, saving the planet. This here is something that I've had a long time. This is the Green Bible. This is the Green Bible. From Genesis to Exodus, everything that refers to the environment, to God's work, is in green. Some of our Bible, we have the red letter edition when Jesus speaks. It's in red. This is the Green Bible, and Desmond Tutu did the forward for it. One of the best books I've seen. This one here, The Gospel According to the Earth. The Gospel According to the Earth. This one here, High Tide on Main Street. These are people that have been concerned about holy ground, a gathering of voices on caring creation. This one here, Matthew Sleeth and I'll be together next week. Serve God, save the planet. I say all of these, and I saw them this morning when I was leaving. Here's one, a biblical ecology, the splendor of creation. Durley, all that Jesus stuff and God stuff, don't you know God is causing climate change? We're in his environmental cycle. So what can we do? We feel so helpless. That's when you get strong. Paul said, I am strongest when I'm in my weak. I have a thorn in my side, and the thorn makes me strong to get up. God he didn't give us the power of fear. Fear is fed by ignorance. All of these sessions are about how do I eradicate the ignorance and find that strength that God gave me? How do I let the Holy Spirit lead me into these kinds of battles, because my source of fuel is that this is morally right. Our cause is just. And it's not for the next generation. It's for this generation. And that's why it's so important that as we call out all of the data from the science, the 192 scientists, we've got to look and fuel that this is. And once we can show, and it's not a long way away, show business people how they can get a return on their money, how they can go to solar. When I was in Germany, Germany had less sun than Atlanta, but they're going solar and wind and all of this. When we can see that in the grids that are coming about now, where we can do it, where we can show that they can make a money. And the politicians say, if you all are making money, will you re-elect me? Certainly, they win. But right now, as long as we're in our separate silos, we can't. We are the connecting group. We're the bridge. Somewhere I read that there was a bridge from here to there when he hung on a cross. And when he hung on a cross, he was the bridge from here, from perdition to a salvation that gives us a sense of peace. God says this, if you obey my first commandment, I will give you the peace that surpasses all understanding. And the peace I give you will control how you think and how you feel. So if any of you got up this morning not thinking well, nor feeling well, you're not at peace. And if you're not at peace, you're rejecting God's gift already. He says, I will give it to you. And right now, we're not at peace because we're going in so many directions. I say to you this morning, St. Luke's and this group here, you now are the solutionaries from a political point of view to talk to people and talk to others, not about the next generation, but where we are now. When I spoke in Dallas, the title of my topic was The Future is Now. The future is now. So I commend you. I'm glad you allowed me to come. I'm sure there might be some questions or some rocks or something to throw this way. But I am here for the long haul now. I never thought at this stage in my life, since I've gone into retirement, that I would be up doing this. But you never know in a Kairos moment how God will call you for such a time as this. You never know. You never know when a seed is planted in a young person's head. And I close with yesterday, I sat and I felt overburdened and I cried a little bit there in Dallas, Texas, at this huge place with 100-something thousand people. That was on Friday. And I looked up and I saw about 2,000 children. And they were doing something that I don't see children do too much now. I couldn't believe it. they were running and laughing on the grass. They were throwing frisbees and rolling in the grass. And I'm saying, what is wrong with these kids? Where are the machines? And then I saw of that group of children, I saw something really touched me. The schools had a field day that day, and it had to be at least 500 to 600 young black children out there running and laughing. And I say, you know, it was worth it to stay in the battle. And if we can stay in the battle right now for climate change, we will make a difference. Thank you very much. Let me read something just briefly. Judaism. When God created the first human beings, God led them around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said, see my works, how lovely they are and how fine they are. Take care not to corrupt and destroy my world. Native spirituality. Oh, great spirit, help us learn the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Shinduism. Return to the thing given to the human as a gift of nature to the original place. Sikhism. Air is the guru, water is the father, and earth is the great mother of all. Taoism. In harmony with the Tao. The sky is clear and spacious. The earth is solid and full. All creatures flourish together. Unitarianism. We affirm and promote respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Zoroastrianism, who created the water and the plants, who yoked the swiftness of the wind and the motion to the cloud. For I beheld Ahura Mazda as the primary source. Baha'i, know thou that every created thing is a sign of the revelation of God. Buddhism, cut down the forest of desire, not the forest of trees. Confucianism, does heaven say anything? The four seasons pursue their courses of all, and all things are continuously being produced. Does heaven say anything? Hinduism, I am the fragrance of the earth, the heat in the fire. I am the life of all lives. Islam, have you not considered how Allah sets forth a parable of a good word being like a good tree whose root is firm and whose branches are in heaven? Christianity, what is the kingdom of God like? It is like a mustard seed that someone took and sowed in it the garden. It grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air made nests in its branches. All faiths. We're not in this alone. C'est tout. Quelquefois, c'est très difficile, le plus les personnes qui parlent en français maintenant aujourd'hui. Merci bien. Gracias. Yes. Questions? Answers? Yes. Comments? Yes.
Yeah, you're convincing that this is something that we really need to deal with, and my experience tells me that we have to do things that are significant to us, not just donate money. We've got to give up cars. We've got to do other things. So can you give us some ideas in terms of significant things we can do?
Well, you started with one. And I said the toughest situation that I see is changing, not only, well, I'll say Americans, changing lifestyles. Those of us who were poor, and I said it to someone earlier, I came up poor, we had an outdoor toilet there in St. Louis, California, and I said, one of my goals in life, I'm gonna buy me a new Cadillac. But I wouldn't think about consumption. Mine was to get away from that mindset. And finally, when I was able to afford a nice, big, long Cadillac, they started making them small. So I moved and got a Mercedes. And then I found out that I was a hypocrite when I was leaving a house up here speaking one night, and I parked my Mercedes about a block away. They were driving Priuses and Teslas, and I didn't want them to see that I was a hypocrite. So I had to go through a mindset to change, so now I drive a hybrid. So I had to go through a mindset when it comes to the consumption of just electrical waste. Most people leave, and these are small things, but they're major things. Can you imagine a half a million people, or whoever it might, whatever number, turning off just electricity? Then legislating laws to be able to stand. When I was up there in Washington at the Rayburn building, yes, I got blasted. I was there with a group of people, and we were trying to get the agriculture department to label food GMO, genetically modified organism. And one of the aides of the congressman took me to the side and said, you know, you're an exciting man. And we like what you say. And you've touched some of us in here, and we know what you're saying. But let me say this. We're not going to label GMO because you will not buy any product from America with that label on it. It's about the money. So we've got to challenge those laws. We've got to challenge, like all the plastic that's going into the ocean that's killing, that put certain legislative laws. I'm on the Waterkeepers Board with Bobby Kennedy, and we were over in North Carolina because of the open pits of the hog waste. We managed to change the laws for those hog farmers are closing the pits before all of the waste was going into the subterranean level of the ground, and it was in the water and the stench. And where did they put it? In the minority community. Where are the waste dumps? The minority community. That's why people have to show up. A man once told me in Nashville, Tennessee in 1960, we were down marching and something. He put his finger in my face and said, let me tell you something right now. You're a Negro. I was glad he knew it. And this is our country. You need to go back to Africa. You'll never be able to vote in this country. Don't you understand that? You got to understand that. And I was a freshman. I said, yeah, man. It was very discouraging. But when I look back, he's dead, and I'm voting right now. So it's a matter of picking. Some people are more concerned about one thing and another thing. But if we all come together, we can make a difference. We're on the winning team. I'm not a bungee jumper, but I don't knock them for bungee jumping. That's their thing. But I'm going to give them some clean air to jump in. So these are the kinds of things along the way. Legislating, consumption, talking to people, bringing awareness. People power, I believe, is powerful even in 2019. Yes.
I love your idea of being exciting and talking about and getting people excited about this. We are working on, my group is working on a movement kind of answering your question, what can we all do? And if you own even the smallest property, you can really make a difference in your own yard. We have 50 million acres of lawn and 2 billion gallons of gas are used for upkeep on that lawn annually. So we're asking people to shrink the lawn and put in native plants, and it can make a huge difference.
Yeah, urban gardening. Before I left Providence, we got a large urban garden, and I didn't believe what had happened. It changed the complexion of the community. At one time, that field had wine bottles and beer cans and kudzu all over. It's cleaned up now, and it's a flourishing right off a Cascade. And guess who gets the vegetables and the fruit? Those that used to spend the bottles over there. And now they're protecting the ground. We don't even have to put a fence around. They say, don't, no. They don't call it holy or sacred ground, but they say that's our food source. And so everybody wins. And the children learn when they start growing tomato plants in egg cartons. It was a new thing when the Coretta Scott King girls came over one day several years ago, and I heard 2 girls screaming, and I didn't know what had happened. I ran out, and they had a worm in their hand. They had never seen a worm. Now that sounds kind of basic, but where would they see a worm grow in a cement jungle? So, but then they got a new level of awareness. I just finished a 10-city tour with a group of rappers. Interesting. And we went to 10 historically black colleges and universities to convince them to look at their majors now. Look at environmental engineering. Look at solar power. Look at starting companies that go to alternative energy. Again, creating a thought pattern of how they can make a difference. And I had one embarrassing moment there, but I managed to get through it. I was at Howard University, 1,800 young people, and the rapper finished rapping, and they said, now we're going to bring up OG. And I said, yeah, I thought OG stood for original old gentleman. And so I said, yes, I'm an old gentleman. I'll be an old gentleman, but I've lived long enough to be an old gentleman. And they were laughing all up in the balcony, laughing. And I said, what's wrong with being an old gentleman? And one of the rappers came up and said, Doc, that means old gangster. And they were laughing. I said, oh, you didn't think I knew what it meant, huh? I am a gangster for the environment. I am a gangster for justice. I am a gangster for making your life better. I'll be a gangster for righteousness. Turned the crowd around. And then I said, whew. It's how you get flexible with what it is that God has given you.